Volume 3, SBA Mission and Small Business Needs. On March 19, 2025, the SBA abruptly canceled its COVID EIDL Hardship Accommodation Plan, or HAP. The cancellation didn't simply pertain to preventing future enrollment in the HAP, but was also immediately applied to the SBA-approved HAP programs already in place. A significant portion of small business owners enrolled in the HAP received no notice of the cancellation and didn't find out until weeks later that a program they thought they were currently participating in no longer existed. Discussions regarding a pending cancellation of the entire HAP program hasn't been a topic of conversation or even a known potential future outcome within the SBA small business community. So when the announcement was made, it not only placed an unexpected obstacle in the path of small business, it left business owners feeling blindsided and once again scrambling to cope with yet another devastating hurdle they've been forced to navigate over the past 5 years. Moreover, lack of SBA guidance post-announcement left small business owners in a purgatory of uncertainty, adding additional burden and anxiety to the compounding complexities stifling their ongoing business rebound and recovery efforts. As such, there is a growing consensus among the small business community that the handling of the situation has left yet another bad taste in their mouths and, ultimately, increased the rate at which their trust in the SBA is eroding. And small businesses aren't the only ones who have publicly stated their disappointment in the SBA's ability to make decisions and take action in ways that have the best interest of small businesses at heart. The SBA's own administrator, Kelly Loeffler, touched on this subject in a statement last week, in which she said, quote, "In the last 4 years, the agency has veered off track, doubling in size and turning into a sprawling leviathan plagued by mission creep, financial mismanagement, and waste." End quote. What Ms. Loeffler has publicly identified is similar to recent findings within the Department of Education, in that more money, more resources, and more jobs have been added to these organizations than ever before. Unprecedented, overly abundant amounts. Yet, despite the gross volume of additional resources, the targeted recipients funds are intended to benefit continue to receive poorer quality and lesser access to the things they actually need in realms of education, assistance, advocacy, and representation. And in the case of small business, they appear to also be indirectly footing the bill for the diminishing value received. I appreciate that Ms. Loeffler has publicly identified and acknowledged that the SBA's actions have progressively strayed further and further away from their mission. However, something else that she mentioned recently raised a red flag for me and gives me skepticism that the reorganization efforts will properly deal with the totality of mission creep that hurts small business and aids in their death by 1,000 cuts. What Mrs. Loeffler said that raises this concern for me is, quote, "The SBA was created to be a launchpad for America's small businesses by offering access to capital, which in turn drives job creation, innovation, and a thriving Main Street." End quote. This is a position that I respectfully disagree with, as the SBA was not created to be a launchpad by offering access to capital to small business. The SBA was created in 1953 as an independent agency of the federal government to aid, counsel, assist, and protect the interests of small business concerns, preserve free competitive enterprise, and maintain and strengthen the overall economy of our nation. SBA reviews congressional legislation and testifies on behalf of small business. It assesses the impact of regulatory burden on small business, because the SBA's mission is to aid, counsel, assist, and protect, insofar as possible, the interests of small business concern. This is directly from the SBA's website. The SBA is also charged with ensuring that small businesses earn a fair proportion of government contracts and sales of surplus property. This is a side note I'd like to bookmark, the last sentence regarding ensuring small businesses earning a fair proportion of government contracts and sales of surplus property. And we're going to discuss this in a future video. The birth of the SBA ultimately came to fruition through a series of events, starting with the creation of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, or RFC, in 1932. The RFC was a federal lending program for all businesses, large and small, that were hurt by the Great Depression. In 1942, Congress created the Smaller War Plants Corporation, or SWPC. The SWPC loaned money to entrepreneurs and encouraged financial institutions to extend credit to small enterprises, and additionally acted as an advocate for small business to federal agencies and big businesses. The SWPC was abolished in 1945 at the end of World War II, and the RFC took over management of their lending and contract powers, while the U.S. Department of Commerce took on duties addressing small business. During this time, the Department of Commerce identified that the main cause of small business failure was attributable to a lack of information and expertise, and they created the earliest forms of educational support via brochures and counseling individual entrepreneurs and management to address it. Failure due to lack of information and expertise is a universal principle that's true in any application. If you don't know much about something, and you're also not skilled at it, you're not likely to excel at it. This is why none of my friends ask me to take care of their plants when they're out of town. In 1950, an organization similar to the SWPC, called the Small Defense Plants Administration, or SDPA, was created to evaluate small businesses and certify them to the RFC if they judge a business can execute government contracts, and then RFC would manage access to capital needed. The SDPA was short-lived as a standalone, and 2 years later, after inception, the SDPA was disbanded, and its functions of evaluation and certification were later rolled into the formation of the SBA. In 1952, the RFC was ended through legislature, and all of its functions were transferred to the Department of Treasury. In 1953, the SBA was born. So in summary, the SBA was not created for the sake of being a launchpad for America's small businesses to acquire or access capital. Offering access to capital, or as I often jokingly call it, avenues to acquire debt, were never a function or responsibility of the SBA. Those all went with the RFC and ended up in the Department of Treasury. So let's take a step back and look again at the current COVID EIDL loan predicament of the small business community through this very elaborate illustration. The SBA marketed, facilitated, awarded, and managed $1.2 trillion in COVID EIDL and PPP loans. The total amount estimated to be fraudulent by the SBA in their own report was $200 billion. Breaking out what we know has been forgiven of the PPP, which is $755 billion, we have $65 billion left. And then the estimated portion that's fraudulent by the SBA, as announced by them, is $64 billion, leaving us with roughly $1 billion of unforgiven, outstanding PPP loans. Move over to the right side, and we have $380 billion of COVID EIDL money distributed. The SBA has estimated that $136 billion of this is fraudulent. That leaves us with $244 billion. The SBA charged off $52 billion of that on September 30th, leaving us with $192 billion, and then charged off $78.8 billion again on March 31st of 2024. So, first of all, I have some questions, and maybe someone can shed some light on how these were charged off, because all of the documentation that I have and all of the boards that I've seen and the feedback and the real-world experience of business owners is that this has been a haunting debt that inevitably cannot go away. I'm very curious to understand how that's charged off. And on top of that, if we align the timeline of when the HAP program was started with these charge-offs and then go even further back to the 30-month deferral period, that means that the SBA charged off $52 billion worth of debt before they'd even had the chance to collect it for a full year. For me, I feel like it's not enough time to determine that $52 billion of debt is uncollectible, especially when a lot of the wording for those that are guaranteed, or all of the wording for those that have personal guarantees, state that you cannot charge off the debt. But at best, when all is said and done, the SBA has a potential to collect maybe 30% of loans disbursed. And in reality, less than a third of loaned funds will be paid back. That's not a win. And the millions of business owners who somehow got their loans charged off and also have been left with crippling debt and credit score issues and lost their businesses and their homes and their livelihoods and their retirements, that's not a win. And as a result, the number of future business owners with the potential to lend to will be significantly less because for us 99%ers, we have to rely on our credit score, assets, past loan history, and such to receive funds for starting a new business. And you can't use the argument that, well, a whole new group of people will just become business owners because we know it's not for everyone, and that's okay. But you're not going to take a large group of people who inherently are not interested in being business owners and have them suddenly gain interest in it. And on top of that, we know the percentage of businesses, small businesses especially, that actually make it to fruition for the 1, 3, 5, 10-year marks. So nonetheless, with the rapid transition of finance management being handled by AI and software automation, the chance of someone's unique story and circumstances being properly heard and taken into consideration during a loan application process becomes slimmer and slimmer. So there's value in developing relationships with lenders, but when the human element is removed, that's simply impossible to do. Using the high-level metrics of how this funding was handled, I see no evidence that supports having the SBA assume responsibilities that don't belong to them, especially in terms of access to capital. I do, however, see loads of evidence that support the need for the SBA to aid and counsel small business with the formidable challenges they're currently dealing with, and for the SBA to support and assist small business with fair treatment regarding the unbalanced burdens they've been forced to shoulder since the inception of the pandemic, but weren't imposed on the rest of the private, public, and government sectors. Small business needs an ally. They need a voice. They need the SBA to be their representative at the federal level, an authentic representative that tells the story and reality of small business. One that works with the government and large entities on behalf of small business, that listens to small business and assembles their direction and messaging based on the state of small business and their concerns. Small businesses need the SBA to provide guidance, counseling, and educational resources so they can get better at running their business. Small businesses do not need to be prepped for serving up on a plate to lenders. Being guided to more avenues of debt is the last thing they need. Small business needs help with building better processes, identifying methods for resourceful prudence, and finding efficiencies. They need assistance with navigating crippling debt from the EIDL and the front-loaded interest that continues growing their amount owed and is very credibly threatening the future of their lives in a way that would not only impact them, but a substantial portion of the U.S. as well. The COVID EIDL loan was intended to help small business during an unforeseen global crisis, not leave small business worse off than it started. There's no shame in admitting that a mistake was made. In fact, the world and interpersonal relationships as a whole would be better off if doing so was practiced more frequently. And when our mistakes inadvertently come at the expense of others, as they inevitably will at some point in everybody's life, we need to do the right thing by being accountable for our mistakes and try to make things better. I think it makes sense for both small business and the rest of the country who are substantially impacted by the health of small business that the COVID EIDL loans are either forgiven or drastically reduced, and that as the SBA moves forward with the focus of returning to their intended mission, they are no longer centered around finding ways for business to acquire debt, but instead focus on education and coaching to fill the gaps of lack of information and expertise, which is proven to be the main cause of business failure. What are your thoughts? The assembly of this video is basic because I lack both experience and a team to assist with polishing it up. I'm not so concerned with the aesthetics of everything as I am with having a well-informed position that uses credible sourcing, and as such, do my best to ensure that any position I present is backed with adequate information. I encourage bringing factual inaccuracies to light and will do my best to properly address those items. Keep in mind, however, creating content is not my day job, so if you reach out to me and I don't reply in a timely fashion, don't take it personally. I have a fairly extensive queue of topics I intend bringing to the table soon, and I hope that you choose to stick around for what's coming next. And if these topics are of interest, I encourage you to also subscribe to my channel and share a link to spread the word to others as well. The best and most fruitful conversations are those that involve more than one point of view. I don't have anticipation that everyone will see eye to eye all the time, nor do I frankly want us to, because an environment of groupthink mitigates the chance for growth. But I do have the expectation that anyone who contributes will treat others with courtesy, maturity, respect, and come to the table with a mindset of being amenable to evolving their point of view if presented with new or different information that warrants doing so. And they should expect the same treatment in return. Looking forward to next time. Free Thinking CLR.